Hello, hello, and welcome to Key Bar. This is Tembi, and today I'm so excited to be speaking with theater maker, director, activist, and scholar Nwabisa Plaatjie. Nwabisa Plaatjie is an independent producer, theater maker, and director based in Cape Town, South Africa. She holds an MA in theater and performance from the University of Cape Town, and her practice draws from traditional oral storytelling practices to create plays that challenge systemic discrimination in the theater sector. Her artistic prowess and leadership have been recognized through various special grants and commissions and support the creation of 9 original pieces, with 2 touring internationally. Her latest play, Zayana, was created through the support of the International Network for Contemporary Performing Arts Local Journeys for Change, Georgetown University's Laboratory for Global Performance and Politics, where she was a global fellow, as well as the Institute of Creative Arts, and encouraged her to make various contributions in the National Theater and Dance Policy, breathing new vision into theater and dance in South Africa. Nwabisa is devoted to stories, people, and culture. She is an alumna of the Mandela Washington Fellowship 2020-2021, an IETM Global Connector 2022, and an ISPA Global Fellow, and that's the 2022 and 2023 cohort. From 2018 to October 2022, she coordinated and curated the Baxter's Masambe Theater, driving its relaunch as a space for performance, collaboration, mentorship, and networking. In 2023, she launched her An Artist is Made project, celebrating community and recognizing the role of social and cultural capital in our creative journeys. The project was funded by the National Arts Council and included plays, workshops, an archiving project, and community building platforms. Coming in live and direct from South Africa, welcome, Nwabisa.
Thank you, thank you.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited to talk to you. Let's jump in. You've built a significant body of work in the theater. You've already written 9 plays and directed 11 plays, as well as curating festivals and working as an arts administrator. Where did this journey to professional theater begin for you?
Well, my high school had drama as a subject, so maybe I could say it started there. And then I went to the University of Cape Town, where I did an honors in theater making. And as I graduated, Magnet Theatre, which is a physical theater company in Cape Town, invited me for a theater making internship. So they invited me to apply. So I applied and I got in. And so after my university, after my honors, I was in a theater and was able to explore with other creatives. And the main thing about the internship was that I was only tasked with creating 2 plays for that entire year. So then I had a year where I was, exploring with theater and playing with other creatives. And then from there, once people saw the work that I do from, the people that were following me in varsity and then seeing me in a professional setting, then started inviting me and commissioning me to direct various works or to work with other young actors and write material for them. But I do think it really, being at UCT and being at Magnet, I think Magnet Theatre became the place where I attracted most of my network. They saw my first works and then one led to another, constantly being invited to produce new work.
So, have you always been passionate about theater?
Not theater specifically, but storytelling. I grew up in a home with a very strong tradition of oral storytelling. So I saw my first theater play the year before varsity and my second one in varsity. Where I come from, there isn't a theater building or, spaces where I could go watch plays. But I wanted something close to storytelling. And theater seemed like the closest option.
I love that, the storytelling tradition. So then you became a storyteller over time and you learned and you studied and you had these incredible experiences. And from what I understand, you've directed 2 plays by Alice Childress, who is an African American playwright. You directed Florence and Wine in the Wilderness. Can you talk about that process and the connections that you were able to make as a South African theater artist to an African American theater artist?
What struck me about those 2 plays was that, similar to, Florence is a young actress that wants to begin a career in the arts. But there's this understanding that the white folks are not going to give her that platform. But also, her mother doesn't understand this world that she's about to enter. And similarly to me, I was, I'm entering, the theater industry. And like I said, I'm coming from a very strong oral storytelling background. So on one level, my parents, similar to Florence's family, are thinking, what is this thing this child wants to do? But then at the same, the other point is, no man, this thing is for white people. It's not for people like us. And so I really resonated with that. On another level, you see, with Wine in the Wilderness, Tommy being invited to the space, Bill is painting a triptych, and so Tommy becomes the invited artist. But it's this idea, again, I was drawn to that play because of this idea that the class dynamics when it comes to the Black community, yes, there's an artist here trying to figure something out, playing something out, but there's also another Black person coming in who doesn't understand this art, who wants to understand the space. And you start to see the class dynamics between the Black community. I was drawn because I could relate with the narrative. And it was something that I was thinking about around, really, how do I start a career here? But also, do all Black people not understand theater? What are the here, and then I directed it in 2019. It was after the Fees Must Fall, Roads Must Fall movement. So I was really thinking about, Blacks in a revolution, really, how do we navigate those spaces and how do we deal with our particular contexts and backgrounds, particularly class? Again, just trying to have the conversation with other Black people. And I felt, here's a writer who is talking about things that I'm dealing with right now, really how to be an artist, Florence, resonating with that, and also with other Black people, how do we relate with each other? What are the dynamics at stakes there? How does class influence how we navigate a career in the arts? That was the thing that drew me to those plays. And then as I read about Alice Childress and realized that this woman kept writing and writing and was like, I'm not going to stop. At some point, someone is going to find my plays and start directing them. I think I was inspired. It was a here's someone encouraging me, to just continue writing, even if it doesn't make sense. You're making sense of it through paper, and one day someone is going to find these plays and they're going to start directing them.
That is incredibly inspiring. You've received fellowships, residencies that have taken you around the world to build your craft. What are some universal bright spots or challenges of theater that you've run into? Because you just talked about these connections in terms of class around the Black community, and that is definitely an issue here in the United States. I'm curious what other themes, challenges, ideas that you see. Oh, okay, I deal with that too here.
I think it's around sustainability. I think the more I move around, the more I see, artists saying, how do we actually build sustainable careers with this? You know, um, and then, since becoming a mother, my ear is also open to, mothers that are trying to navigate being a mother and an artist, and refusing to separate those two roles. So I'm seeing more and more of those conversations, and really, how do we create safe and ethical working environments? And funny enough, what's starting to come up is that I can see how we're creating it for the actors, for the performers. But for the producers, we still expect them to work much more. We still expect them to create that working environment. So really, I'm seeing how we're having similar conversations around creating ethical work environments that are sustainable. And we are also acknowledging that often when we have that conversation, we're actually talking about the people on stage. We're not necessarily thinking about the writers and the producers. And how do we begin also thinking about the writers and the producers within this conversation? Because it's all good and well to make sure that the rehearsals flow well, everyone's um, needs are well taken care of, but is the producer well taken care of?
That's an incredibly important question, and it's so interesting that you bring that up because I have not thought about that. The way that we do tend to separate the actors and anybody performing on the stage from the folks who are producing the work. And I love that you're refusing to separate those things, and you're being very intentional about how to address this issue for all theater artists and workers. So that's really interesting. You serve as a mentor for young South African artists, right?
Yes, yes, but I'm also just thinking about the separation. One of the things that just before I speak to mentoring other young artists, but just thinking about how I realized quite early that I couldn't be an advocate for the arts and produce my own work and be involved with policy work and also have the time to create plays. I realized very early that it was not going to work out. So what I did, and I don't even think it was conscious, is that I started writing exactly what I was doing. I started, so that my plays became about the things that I'm bothered about. So I started writing really around sustainability and finding my feet in policy, where there's this character who wants to be involved in that type of thing, so that the work that is outside becomes the content. I started to prioritize it as a content and a story that I wanted to tell. And that has allowed me to really do multiple things at the same time. I'm just like, I'm writing a play. But I also understand that I have now spent 8 months trying to find funding and pitching. So, what does this play look like? When I think about one of my plays, Kalanga Blues, it became about that. It became about pitching. It became about searching for funding and meeting people. And this weight, around unemployment and thinking about, do I leave this industry, do I stay, and also looking around you, so many artists that are leaving the arts to go pursue something else. So I try to not separate. And I think my mentorship, just then speaking to mentorship, is also around that. It's around, how do you make sure you create the art? How do you make sure that you really leverage who you are and your experiences in what you do? Because as long as they're separate, you can spend a whole lot of time trying to find the resources. But if you find the resources and spend 30 minutes later just free writing, you have something, a material that you can use. It can be a monologue one day, but you've now transferred that experience to something else.
You've exposed another dichotomy in the work, and that is between the idea of quote unquote art for art's sake versus art with a purpose to send a message or to address an issue. And obviously a lot of that depends on who gets to see it, right? Who your audience is, or who's allowed to see it, who is able to see it, who has access to it, and who can make decisions based on those messages. So that's really interesting, the way you connect that to the mentorship of the young artists, because you're preparing them for what they're going to have to experience in the work. And so are there questions that they're asking you that are related to those same themes that you're putting into the work with what you're dealing with, the sustainability of it?
Yes, but for them, it's I find that more often, it's not like I'm trying to create other makers who create like me, who are gonna write about sustainability. But I find that now that question is at the forefront. I find that most of the people that I mentor will either, one, find someone to be a producer for them, or two, they really become theater makers who are producers. Because that question of, yes, we're developing work, but where do you want this work to go? Who's gonna give you money to do the, I'm constantly having those conversations. But even when people invite me, I find that that's the conversation they want. They bring me in the room because they want us to talk about the shelf life of the play. They want us to talk about, and I'll ask things like, beyond the stage, beyond seeing it, how else does this thing live? Are we going to take pictures and have an exhibition? Are you going to record the music? Are you thinking of going to schools? Are you going to have workshops? So, already at the very beginning, it's not something that comes later. At the very beginning, while we're dealing with the dramaturgy of everything, you also just making sense of how this might fit within your community.
So, in 9 plays, have you seen an arc or a trajectory of a realization of that? Or from your very first play, have you been thinking about sustainability? Because you mentioned becoming a mother. Congratulations. And, and, making those discoveries then. But before you started work as an artist before you were a mother, do you feel like you've evolved towards that understanding of sustainability, or has it always been in your mind?
It was not. It actually wasn't in my mind until someone said it to me. And it was a director that I really look up to, well-established director in South Africa, Mandla Mbotwe, who said to me, Nobisa, do you realize that you write about the means of production? And we're watching your play, but we actually get to understand the industry. And I didn't see it at that time. And then my master's production, what I did for the production I was talking about, where I started writing about the pitching and searching for grants, and is that there I used an analogy of my plays as I call them my babies. So throughout the play, we constantly talked about these babies and who their fathers are, um, and whether their fathers support them post delivery, or it's just this fatherless children, or so I started using that this idea that a production is a baby. And when I became a mother, I sort of realized what that means, because I am looking at my daughter and I'm thinking about the type of future that I wanted to have. And I realized that with my plays, I moved on too quickly. Whereas with Luna, I can see that, at 18, these are the things that I want for you. Like I am planning quite well for her life, and I am there making sure that I attend to all her needs, and I'm aware of her interests. And I realized that I wasn't giving the same type of care to my plays. If I call them my babies, am I aware of the nuggets, the interest, the things that are coming up from them? Also, how do I really take care of them? How do I grow with them? Part of being, creating 9 plays over, starting a career in 2016, it has happened because someone was commissioning me. It's happened because someone's putting money and say, create a play, write a play. So you write and you move on. The next person is bringing a pot of money, and the only thing that I've always wanted is to own my work. So I'm just like, okay, I'll create that. I'll do that. I'll write that. Even with the acetate program fragments, you get selected with this thing. I get an opportunity to be mentored by you. I'm like, sure, I'll do it. Let's write a play. So then in that way, you are producing really quickly, but you're not really taking time to stop and say, what's here? What is it showing me? Where does it want to go? If it were to grow more over the years, how would it look like? I think one of the things that I've realized now is that last year I took time to write down all the characters that I've written. And I started to see strange things where I'm like, oh my word, I can see this child becomes this type of adult. Like I'm starting to see an arc in the characters in different players. I'm just like, with that attitude, you actually this antagonist that I'm just writing now with that attitude. And that's just looking at all the characters and also realizing that I've actually been writing women, then thinking, and someone's like, oh my word, where are the men in my plays? Where are the men in my world? So but that comes because I'm now analyzing the characters that I've written, and their cultural significance, and the archetypes that I've been leaning towards.
Well, that's fascinating to look at your body of work and to ask questions and kind of interrogate your own thought process around who you're creating and how they show up in the world. Does that lead you towards any sort of intentional creation as you continue writing? Do you now feel like, like you just said, where are the men? Do you now feel like, okay, I'm going to intentionally write more men into this next project?
Yes, it does. It does do that. But also you start, it's like you've created a world. You know, now you start thinking about where do all these characters meet? You know, yes, I've done things where in almost all my plays, I'll reference one or two plays. I'll reference my work in other work. I'll cross-reference. And that's because, again, going back to Alice Childress, there's always this thing that maybe, I won't be able to produce all my work, all this, maybe it won't have the life that it deserves now. But one day when someone picks up one play, I want them to know that there are, that there are other connections. So it's led to that. It's led to, thinking about this world, this fictional world that I've started to create, but also thinking about, how, you know, the men that would be there, what type of men will I write? I really haven't started writing about them, but I've started thinking about that. I started to think about what sort of plays would I want to see.
You focus on professionalization in your work inside and outside based on what you're telling me about how, it becomes a part of the work. What kind of systemic changes are going to be needed for that professionalization to happen, both in South Africa and beyond?
I think when I think about my context in South Africa, it's we have been the talent mostly. It's been, they are great performers and great singers, right? And then there was a shift from actually, let's not just take their plays and stage them and write them, let them write their own stories. And so then there was a shift in the industry where you saw many Black people also becoming directors, and choreographers, because now they're not on stage, but they really, they can shape, but they're still not controlling who brings the money. And I think, we actually need more Black producers now, so that, you're not, because now you're constantly depending on that grant or that institution that's inviting you. And I think that the change that needs to happen is really seeing the entire ecosystem and having and knowing how to educate people about that entire ecosystem. you know um it's not just being, because our curriculum is mostly around being a performer. That's what we're getting mostly right now. In South African, educational institutions, you're learning how to be a performer and you're learning how to create, but you're not learning where to get the money, how to tour that work, how to even build a career with this thing. It's like you're gonna enter a place where all these things exist for you. It's really an educational model that just wants to plant you in a fully functional environment. But then you find many young artists, particularly first generation theater artists who don't have the social and the cultural capital, struggle greatly. Whereas those that have, social and the cultural, in most cases, they leave the country, or they because of their network, they already know where to go in order to get the funding, in order to get the right mentor, the right. So I think a huge part of the change needs to happen in how we are educated. So I did a project last year called An Artist is Made. And essentially what I was talking to is that it actually takes community, in the same way that we say it takes community to raise a child. It takes community to develop an artist. And it's not only institutions, it's also, the people who don't even understand what this thing is, because they become part of the audience. So I started mapping actually most of the people that have supported me from, high school. Even I didn't know what this is, my parents, the church, getting to institutions, established, artists like Fanny Swayisa, who were willing, who said, yes, you can't afford my services and I'm a well-established actor and you're just emerging, but I'll come work with you. So I'm like, that thing also brought more visibility because I was already working with big names. So everyone just had a role beyond the, the institution. So this idea that it will require an entire community, we need to educate each other, we need to support each other, and we actually need an ecosystem. We need to know that where are the resources coming from, how do we sustain them, how do we grow them, yeah.
You talked about mapping all of the artists that you worked with. And then earlier you talked about mapping all of the characters that you wrote. And I'm wondering if this type of reflection has always been a part of your creative process, or have you developed towards that? Have you been mentored to that? Or did you just feel like one day, like, wait a second, I need to take stock of all of this? How did you find your way to that process of reflection?
It really was a one day situation. Firstly, I said to one of my mentors, I think came from, I said to one of my, we were working on the policy document, theatre and dance policy document for South Africa. And I said, I wish every artist in South Africa could have the type of career that I've had. And she said, that's impossible, right? And I agreed with her. And I was like, yeah, it's impossible. I could understand. And then we're like, yeah, this is why we need to focus on this policy document once the resources and then I really got fixated with this policy document. I was like, yes, once this policy is approved in parliament, once all the artists, let's just continue advocating for artists to be supported and to be supported at different levels. And so we did this, and we went to the policy conference and all of these things, and it goes to politicians, it goes to parliament, and I was just sitting, I was like, Nwabisa, but your career was not sustained by this thing. It was sustained by love. Yes, it's important to have this policy document, right? It's important to have support at every level, but then that was not your reality. You were sustained by love and having a conversation with people. And so in that, and at that time the National Arts Council had a call out, they had grant funding available. And so I like really in a day I was like, let's write a proposal, I'm actually going to apply for this thing, and we're doing an artist is made. And so in explaining why I wanted this thing, I was like, I started listing all the people. And it's like, yes, there's a narrative that artists are unemployed, or struggle to get employment, but that hasn't been my reality. Let's start with Magnet. This is so then I started sharing my journey to when I didn't get funding and I walked to Parliament, and met this person in the Department of Arts and Culture. They assisted me in this way. When that didn't work out, and so I started listing these people, and it wasn't, yes, I wanted to get the grant, but essentially I was trying to convince the person who would also read it that, and also convince myself that it's actually been people, and it's been various people at different levels, some artists, some not artists, and they've all been assisting in this thing. And if we could just have a season where we show and have conversations with these people, showcase this thing, it can become a reality for people. And then, yes, I got that funding. So then it was the first level of curating those relationships and these opportunities. And then someone asked me, I think late last year or early this year, I was like, late last year. It was like, when is season 2 of An Artist Is Made coming back? I was like, what? I thought that was just mapping for me. what what's season 2? What are you talking about? But then now I'm more intentional. But beginning it wasn't. It really, it was trying to, it was like, why did you agree when, why do you think no one can have the career that you've had? Why do you think it's within policy only? Because that hasn't been the case for you, yeah.
That's interesting because it feels like sometimes that when the power dynamics are not in our favor, sometimes it does seem like we will agree with something because we feel like, okay, that person knows what they're talking about. They're an authority. And I love that you went back and reflected and said, wait, no, that's not the case. And it led to this incredible project that now you realize is needed. It's you seem to have this ability to connect to the core of what all artists need, in addition to yourself, like through your own reflection. It makes it more universal. And so I want to ask you about the storytelling piece of that. You have definitely the activism and the social justice elements of the work, but the storytelling at its core, as you mentioned before, comes from your ancestry and your culture and your heritage. But also there's a cultural relevance of the storytelling piece, right? Not just in general, because that's what theater is, but because as a South African person in this world in 2024, that's a must. We need to tell these stories. So can you talk about why storytelling is your medium of choice rather than other ways of getting a message across? Because it's clear that the message needed to get through you somehow.
I think it's the one that comes naturally. I don't even think much about it. It's just like my way through things is through story. Or sometimes I say, when I phrase that, my way through things is through theater, but the outcomes are not always theatrical. But what I mean is that I make sense of my world through story. If you confuse me and I don't understand what's happening, I need to get in my room and take a pen and start writing. And then I need to place the characters. I was like, okay, this person, that, me, and the overall, it really comes naturally. It comes, I don't think it really comes naturally. And often what I'm starting to realize now, which I didn't realize, when I'm writing, and I think it has to do with taking a pause and slowing down in the works that I'm doing. We worked on fragments in 2019, right?
Yes, yes.
And essentially, fragments, was talking about this world where no one could tell stories, and it was a shutdown, you know. So, and when COVID happened, I was like, oh shit, here's a world where we can't tell stories, where it's illegal. And it's the same with Kalanga Blues, when I was talking about my plays as babies and then being pregnant and being a mother and experiencing that thing. So I'm starting to analyze my work more, because I'm realizing that there are prophetic nuggets there, whether by chance or by, there's something that I can learn, something that's speaking to the future, that I may not realize when I'm writing it, because you're writing it and then you direct it. But I'm realizing that when I go back and go read that work, there are things that I'm going to find. And that's more interesting right now.
Prophetic nuggets. That is brilliant. That's exactly what they are. And how fascinating that you're absolutely right. You wrote a play in 2019 about the inability to tell stories for various reasons. And then here we come in 2020 where there's an inability to tell stories and we have to kind of work our way through it.
It's even going back in that in 2017, I wrote a play called Nwabisa Plaatjie, where an artist was put on trial via social media. And as the audience came in, and we only had a reading of this play, and it was commissioned, by one of the institutions in Cape Town. And they invited various people to come in. And as the audience was coming in, they were linked into a WhatsApp group so that they could all be in a WhatsApp group together. And, we also projected that conversation so that if you're not on a phone, you could vote. You could see the conversation. And the thing is, the artists put on trial via social media, the WhatsApp group. And then there's a point where you have to vote whether with an emoji, whether the artist is guilty or not guilty, and you would vote with emojis, not guilty or guilty. And I remember the conversations after that play. It was like, this is not theater. This is not theater. It's not, the beep beep of the is distracting. And I was discouraged, but I was like, okay, they've paid me. I've written this play, whatever. I've directed this reading. We're putting it there. And funny enough, so I was in the room with one of the people that are going to commission it in 2020, and she asked me, was like, Nwabisa, that play that you did, I mean, when she said so, I was like, yeah, sure. But I think my ego does get in the way at times. I was like, okay, now that you guys are ready to do it, I don't want to go back. It was a thing that, yeah, okay. I mean, in that moment, I was glad that we could go back and see its value. Whereas I think I could still remember that feeling of being in that room where I was being told that this is not theater. And then 2020, 2 years later, people are now talking about it, and they're talking about it in a way where they are excited for it. I don't know, it was like I knew at that point what I was doing. And I still, would love to do the play at some point. But it was an interesting thing to see how producers can someone sometimes crash something only 2 years later, to say, actually, this makes sense to have a play like this.
Has that led you to see your approach to the work in any different way? Has it changed the way you promote and pitch your work?
I think it's affirmed what I found in Alice Childress again, that maybe people won't appreciate your work now. Just do it. And make sure that it's available, for future generations. Maybe they don't understand it now, but a time will come, for them to want to stage it again. I think it's just I'm constantly going back to the things that I really love, when I was, directing Alice Childress and reading about her. I'm constantly going back to that thing that maybe you won't be given the platform right now. I mean, I am given a platform, but I mean at scale. Maybe you won't get the platform at scale, and be able to share your work with many, many people, but at some point, someone's going to find this work. And it will have meaning and relevance. I think now I'm not touched when people don't get my work. I'm like, okay, you don't get it, but at some point you're gonna get it.
It stands on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who do you write your plays for?
Um, that's a hard one. That's a hard one. I think okay, I think what I've realized about my work is that I was reflecting, Tembi, and like I was really, really trying to make sense of this world that I'm in.
That's what makes you such a great artist.
I was really, really reflecting. That's it. I was just dealing with a whole lot of crazy things and trying to make sense of them in a way that wasn't offensive to anyone, or in a way that wasn't traumatizing me, even in a way that could also give room for my family to understand this thing that I wanted to pursue, or I am trying to pursue. Um, and I think now what I'm realizing is that in the same way that reflection has power, I can also lean on being much more intentional, on creating. It's still creating. I don't know how to explain this, but you're reflecting on the past, you're engaging with the past. But if I were to speculate, if I were to look towards the future and was not reflecting, I'm also thinking about how that would look like in terms of my theater making. Um, Not sure if I make sense.
It feels like a circle. I guess what I hear is there's like this circle that's always moving. I don't know if I'm interpreting that correctly, but
Oh, but it's also this idea that in the same way that we reflect on work, we can also create something new that's not a reflection, that does not have to engage directly with what you went through or were experienced. Or I think things have been very close to me. I'm just like, what would it look like, if I was not reflecting on my experiences?
okay, so maybe not so much a circle, but kind of a dipping back into the well, but still like or maybe you're holding something that you continue to reach into for reflection, for
Mm.
sustenance. That's really, really interesting. And it gives me a lot to think about in terms of the way that where you find connection, both within, without. in time and space. And that's, yeah, that's really fascinating. Um, Artists, you talked about people you've worked with and how fortunate you've been to make certain connections socially, culturally, even financially with a lot of the commissions and support. Who inspires you though? I mean, I feel like Alice Childress is one of the people who inspire you based on how you've engaged with her work and connected that to yourself. But who are other artists that you really are inspired by and who help drive your work?
So it feels like I must answer it in phases.
That works. I like
I'm
that.
really just close by, just thinking within South Africa. I'm really inspired by there's an artist called Jefferson Shabalala. And what he did is, I mean, he was a theater director and a writer, but what he did is that he just created merchandise, the Sinpa merchandise. And it's sort of like has become the uniform for South African artists. Like, I'm just like, are you even a theater artist if you don't have something from his merchandise? And it's
Of
something that
him as an artist or his work?
no, I mean like he created merchandise, right? That has nothing to do with his theater work.
Oh,
It's just these overalls that have the Sinpa logo, which is like a suitcase and with Sinpa. Literally, I'll send you a picture. But
okay. Yes, yes, I will definitely
and
include
this
that.
merchandise has nothing to do with his theater making, right? But it has become the uniform for South African artists, particularly theater artists, and even actors in television. It's like it's become this thing where we joke about, are you even an artist in South Africa if you don't own a Sinpa item?
Wow.
You know,
That's so interesting.
it's I feel like everyone everywhere has this item. They have
Do
an
you?
item.
Are
I
you
do. I have like four. I have four of these it's like different types. And it's just interesting how he's moving between, yes, people are buying clothes, but as you're buying clothes, you're also interested to go see his play. Like we're buying clothes, but we're just like we're also interested in, because you're supporting him with this clothes, you also just feel like I want to go watch his plays. You feel like you're part of his brand because we're so invested in these clothes. He inspires me. Koleka Putuma is another person who inspires me. She's a poet and theater maker as well. Yeah, I think she redefined what it means to be a poet in South Africa. She just went very big. It's quite a few local artists and it's different things, from this person is using something external like Jeff, to I am seeing, colleague really sustain herself through poetry and theater. Just I'm gonna list the various people. That's what's gonna happen.
Yeah, and I love that because as you list these people, I'm listening to the not only the ways they inspire you, but the ways the South African theater ecosystem is constructed.
Hmm. Another person that really inspires me is Buhlengaba. She was mostly known as an actor, but I really loved how she was constantly moving between industries, theater, film, her work with, she loves archiving and history and then started writing plays, around the things that she was finding in the archive, she has a passion for children, just reading books for children and just being engaged with works that improving the literacy skills of young children in South Africa, and how she brings that within her practice. I really love how she's navigating various spaces and creating narratives that speaks to her diverse interests, and that has led to a shift, from people seeing her as an actor to people seeing her as a writer, and also realizing that, oh, people don't know this type of play, so I have to go find the money for them, and then seeing how she's cutting out that producer role in order to make this thing, be seen. Yeah, I think I'll stick with those three for now.
I love that. So, okay, is there somebody who you have a dream to work with to create a new piece? If money were no object and you could get whoever you want, schedules could work out, who would you work with to create something new together?
I mean, it would be you.
Uh,
It would be Tembi.
Really?
Yes. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I can explain.
Yeah, because I'm like, say less. Let's go. When do we start?
I mean, you were the first person to help me see how, you know, we were talking about, and it was with fragments, and we are talking about thunderstorms and these beliefs around thunderstorms and water and the fear that goes with it. And you would, even as I was writing, you would pick things that you knew that this would also resonate with us here. This actually has this type of meaning for us here. And within that experience, I experienced it, and then you move on from it, and just like, but it stayed in my mind that you relate, there are symbols that you relate to, you know that other people also relate to, and have other meanings. And what would it be like to just meet with those people and develop your work, just looking at the symbolism and how we interpret it, particularly of elements, and experiences that are similar. So I think working with you, opened me up in terms of, but also you're also the first mentor that I worked with that actually had the time. I remember speaking to Yvette and saying, South Africans are dealing with a whole lot. The makers, usually someone, they everything. Usually someone is a writer and is the director and is the producer and has 5 jobs trying to make things work. So much so that even mentorship programs, it feels like you are part of the many other things that they are doing. And it's just the landscape that is causing that. It's not necessarily, and also maybe because people have not experienced something different. But when I worked with you, I was able to see something different, which I had to do. I was like, this person actually has the time and the capacity. I don't know how I don't know how their landscape looks like, but we are really delving in. And also how the tools that you gave me from, okay, this is, I don't even think you remember, maybe you do, but you gave me like a template where I'm just like, this is how I analyze a script, but also this is what I use to develop a script. I use that template everywhere. Everyone I mentor, added things as well. So when it comes to who is this person that you're constantly referencing in your craft, and like I said, when I was talking about the people that I meet, I'm like, do you know Tembi? It's constantly
Wow.
referencing the things that I got from you. But I'm just like, I have not been with this person in person. I have not been in a creative room with them, creating something with them, but they are part of my process. They are part of how I speak with my actors, how I mentor young writers, how I unpack my work and develop my work.
Okay, so wow. I'm definitely flummoxed, but thank you. That was so beautiful. And I'm so grateful. And I remember every single thing that you're describing. I remember every part of that process. And I remember the tools that you're talking about. And I would, I'm just still trying to process what you just said, but I would absolutely love to work with you to create a piece. And you know what's interesting? I'm thinking back to what you said earlier in terms of your joy in being able to really spend time working on a piece, developing that piece. When I talk to people here about that and I say, why do we crunch time? I'm always saying we need to make time for the process. And so for you to see that about me, that I believe that time is important and that we this work deserves our attention and devotion is such an honor, and I'm very grateful. So I want you to know that means so you have no idea what that means to me, because I do believe that we should make the time for this work. And a lot of times, and it sounds like you see this as well in your landscape, people are rushing. They're rushing to create work. They're rushing as if, the time, like, oh, I've got so many things to do. And it's like, no, this process deserves your time and love and care. So thank you for that. Yes, it's done. It's done. We're doing it.
I mean, another person that I would love, I'd have to raise them up from is Ellen Stewart.
Yeah, tell me about Ellen Stewart.
I mean, I'm wearing the La Mama thingy, but I went to La Mama Italy, La Mama Umbria Italy. They have the theater directors and playwrights symposium thing. So I went there and I'm in the space, and they're talking about Ellen Stewart, this woman that, founded La Mama in New York, and now they're talking about it. But we're in Italy, so we're in the space and they're looking at these buildings. And in my mind, I'm like, yeah, certainly, and I mean, I'm like, certainly a white woman has all the resources to open things like this, but it's in my mind, right? I'm like, yeah, of course, yeah, white women get the funding and all the monies to do these things. And then they showed us a video.
Oh.
where and then I was like, oh.
Surprise, surprise.
I cried. I kid you not, I cried. I was like, oh my word. It's a Black woman, a Black producer.
Yeah.
Why is no one telling us about Black producers? What's happening? And then I became obsessed with her and just studying her life, visiting La Mama in New York, just seeing that space, and getting to understand some of the choices that she was taking, what was inspiring her and her journey. And so I think when I think about what she was able to achieve as a producer, I'd love, I'm like, I want to do that. I'd love to sit down with you and as a producer, I'm just like, I'd love to sit down with you and strategize with you. Really, how do we make space for international artists? And funny enough, last year I spent time just meeting South African legends within the theater sector and just sitting with them, like having coffee, chatting, all of this. And I met a writer, Mrs. Fatima Dige. And as we were talking, she started talking about the time that she had at La Mama, staying with Ellen Stewart. And of course, I lost my mind. I was like, oh my word, you know her too? You So it's this thing when now, and I'd message David every time I met someone who knew Ellen. It's like I'm meeting people who know Ellen now. I don't know whether it's because I'm obsessing about her in my mind as well. I'm like, oh, this person that I feel did a lot, who inspires me, who I wish, I could bring back and like, let's sit down and let's produce something.
She had an incredible impact on so many people. So I've never met her in person, but I too was fascinated by her ability to sit in that producer space. And it really, just listening to you talk about her work lets me know that there are those of us who understand early on that complete control over the creative process, including production, is essential. And when we see representation, it lets us know that it's possible, because if it, so many of us, right, will go into the performance space because we just whether it's consciously or unconsciously, feel like, well, that's what we do, and that we're good at that, and that's what I see so many amazing performers. Let me go in that direction, and it is interesting to listen to your impressions of her before you saw her and before you knew that she was a Black woman, and just what that did for you and how that inspired you. Representation is so important.
So important. So important.
Now, you talked a little bit about taking some time recently.
Yeah.
And I feel like that taking that time has also helped you reflect.
Uh-huh.
What is your approach to self-care? How do you include self-care in your creative process? Or do you? Is it separate from your creative process, or is it embedded in your creative process?
With my last plays, Yana, it was embedded. because and here's a play where I got the money first.
Well, that makes a
So
difference, doesn't
I got
it?
the money. No, 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 no. No one was commissioning me. I got all the monies that I needed, and I kept getting money. Like it felt like they were just open vessels, to the point where I remember sitting with the cast and was like, how would an ideal working environment look like for you? And one of the things that they sounds like, even having a place to stay, like if we had accommodation close to our rehearsal venues, then we wouldn't worry about transport. And I got money to pay for them throughout that period to stay in a place, to have their own house.
Oh, wow.
So this was just one of those processes where it really wasn't about the play, but I knew that I couldn't rehearse change without a play. I knew that I wanted actors in a room, me being the director and that producer in that space. And I wanted us to talk about, being Black women in the industry, and adapting fragments, because, Ziana I've adapted fragments, So yeah, we entered that space. We were like, how do we create a safe working environment? Even creating a manifesto, and that's something that I know that in every space I go into, to establish, can we talk about the ethics that we are bringing within the space about how I want to work? Um, as a mother now, I'm just like, I don't work. I hardly work evenings, Tembi. It's just a very weird thing. I'm like, I am not coming. Like if it's an evening, I'm not coming. And
This is not happening.
it's not happening. And it's funny because people started getting used to it, to the point where people will tell me, and also don't give me one choice for a matinee that's on Saturday, because I'll tell you, my child is not at school on Saturday. I need a matinee during the week. You need a matinee during the weekend on a Saturday. It's like I started forcing my environment to respond to my challenges as a mother. I think before I was the mother, guys, I am really sorry. I didn't care about these things. I didn't think about them. They didn't cross my mind. And then after I became a mother, I was like, oh my word, I don't want to work weekends. I actually want to be with my family. I don't care if things are sinking. I'm like, I don't want to work a Sunday. I don't want to work. You start being clear about the thing, your boundaries. And that wasn't there. I didn't have a work-life balance. And also before I took a break, I realized that my entire life was theater. I'm not surprised. It was like I spent my entire life was theater. There really was nothing that wasn't theater about it. So now to begin separating and try to find interests that are not, I was like, this is work. This is the things that I'm interested in. These are my hobbies. It's not just one. I work within the theater in a theater institution. I am watching plays at night. I am chilling with artists in the weekend. We are rehearsing something, or, to intentionally make space for something else. I learned how to swim last year. Every Tuesday I took a hobby. I was like, let's go learn how to swim. I got Luna in an ice skating club, so then I started learning how to ice skate. So
I
those are
love
things
that.
that have nothing to
That's
do.
wonderful.
Those have nothing to do with theater. But of course, I think I'll probably bring it back at some point. And I've absolutely fallen in love with breath work. I love breath work. I love, it's one of those things where I started attending Sarah Matchett, within drama school, we do breath work, but to go to an entire session where you're spending 2 hours just breathing and not talking, it just felt like the right therapy and self-care routine for me, to build my awareness of breath, to regulate and to explore with my breathing. So yeah, that's another thing that I have stepped into.
Okay, so are you the breath work that you're doing? Are you studying a particular breathwork practitioner, or is it proprietary, the person that you're working with? I'm just curious.
So, oh, Sarah Matchett had just trained with Breathwork Africa. She's a certified breathwork practitioner. And at that point, when I started breathwork, it was one of the things I'm just like, I'm leaving my job. I don't like how I've set up my career. I didn't like how I had set up my career because it didn't leave room for me to do other things. I had set up an impossible structure and I didn't know how to shift it. And so one of the ways is, traditional therapy, where I could sit with someone and talk through my problems. But Sarah's like, listen, here's this thing, you could come to breathing sessions. And they're quite similar to yoga sessions, maybe, but essentially, I mean, when you do yoga, you're also breathing, but now it's you just focusing on breathing. We could also be regulating, we could be doing conscious connected breathing for like an hour. It's just various things that it could be doing. But you really just building an awareness and you're breathing, essentially. You're breathing. How in a therapy session you'd go and speak with someone for an hour. You get there and we just breathe in different ways, through different body parts. Yeah. I don't know if that answers.
That it does. It absolutely does, because I was very curious about just what the approach was and how you all move through that process, because we don't breathe. Obviously, in your study of theater, you learn that we don't breathe properly as humans going through life. And so to focus on breath and to shut everything else out, I'm sure has a tremendous effect on you. And you mentioned earlier about the things that you're interested in, swimming and ice skating and just taking care of Luna and your
they they
family.
all just they all just aligned. They all
Yes,
just aligned. I mean, essentially, I had a sabbatical year because I also did yoga. I joined an ashram because ashrams you do yoga for free. Yoga can be expensive, so then I joined an ashram where it was free for me to go do yoga whenever I wanted to go do it.
that's brilliant.
So then you had these things where, but also here's the thing, here's the catch. Also, someone's like, for the longest time, I didn't join swimming classes because like this is expensive, and I don't have the time. And last year, there were just free swimming lessons that were being provided by the Western Cape. So it's like, okay, let's go do all these free things that are self-care routines. um, I think that the greatest challenge to me is that what I did is that I put a break in everything. It was like, well, it's hard to stop doing the mentorship or writing but I left my job and then and I just focused on myself. And that entailed like it's the swimming, it's the walks, it's the breathing, it's the yoga, it's the reading clubs. And I think I know deep down, or even then I knew that I could see it in the gaps where I have a job, where all of that falls through. When I have a job, I go back to the old habits where, you forget those routines that you've built around taking care of yourself. But with the productions, Diana, like I said, is that by doing by rehearsing how the change I want to see and having a manifesto for how I want to work with actors, it means whenever I enter a rehearsal room, that will happen. But my work environment, I'm only directing 1-2 plays a year, and I'm still working in the theater. So there's still toxic things that like I said, I didn't like my working culture. It's a working culture that I established. No one put this culture on. It was like I established how I work. I established those routines, and I didn't know how to break them without bringing everything to a stop, without saying, okay, let's pause here. Let's do I'm only going to do ABC. But I still worry because I feel like when I go back to working fully again, not just directing a play or mentoring, just being in a theater institution again, I feel like I might just go back to old habits, working 24/7. This is my second year of, I've even left the city. I'm in rural Eastern Cape, with my daughter, with my family, and just she's in the new school here. And again, even here, I am connecting with artists, but it's like I'm doing it from the comfort of my home. I am not working evenings. I am not working weekends. I'm still strict about those boundaries. Um, but I think self-care is something that it goes a lot with habits. And it's like, and habit, you can develop a strategy for how you're gonna take care of yourself, but your habits, what's this thing? Culture eats, what is it? Habit eats strategy for breakfast, something for that, like that. Habit eats strategy for breakfast. And that's how I feel about self-care. It's like it's something that I'm very intentional about. But when I am in working spaces, I find that my habits tend to take over, this thing of working till the very early hours of the morning.
And that's a big part of theater culture, right? Is just working hours and hours and hours. And another big part of theater culture is something that you spoke to earlier in our conversation around parenting and providing support for parents and making sure that children are taken care of and included in the process where possible. So it is interesting that you have that level of self-awareness of, I know that when I get in that mode, I may just fall right back into those habits. So it seems to me that that self-awareness is the thing that'll protect you because you'll be able to clock it and say, okay, remember, I told myself I wouldn't do this. So that's really impressive. So, all right, what excites you now, moving forward, looking forward? What's next on your path? I love what you're doing now. And I'm just going to say there's been a movement, especially I would say in the past like 6 to 8 years, but COVID seems to have accelerated it where Black women are saying, you know what? Putting me first. There's this global movement of us putting ourselves first and setting boundaries and making change and being the architects of our own destiny. So I'm curious where you're falling into that movement right now.
I think what's exciting now is, ooh, I'm editing
I
it.
know that's a lot, right?
I'm editing it. Um,
Oh, you gotta edit
edit, 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 edit. I
it.
think when I realize my creative potential, and I think I have an appreciation for my creative potential. And when I left my job, I remember one of the things that my mentors kept saying to me was, Nwabisa, you just had a child. Life can be challenging and can be hard. And I remember I said, I don't know how old you guys think I am, but I'm a child. I'm going home. I'm going to my room.
Did you say that? Is that what you said?
Yeah, yes. Guys, I have a mother and a father. I'm going home. I'm a child. I've been very, very responsible, but I'm okay. I'm gonna be okay. And it's been interesting to see how you can really leave institutions, you can really leave formal structures, which I feel, I was privileged enough to be in those spaces and still be able to sustain. It's a very weird thing because you often feel like you need to be working 150, 150% in order to just get, opportunities. But even this conversation now, having this conversation with you, in January, I was in New York again. In May, I'm going to Washington, D.C. In June, I'm planning to be in Italy at La Mama again. It's this idea that just because you stop, it doesn't mean things will stop finding you. And you can be in a very
Mm.
remote area, very the remotest, like I am in right now, But it's exciting to know that there is always abundance. And I know at times it doesn't, because one of the things that make us stay within toxic cultures and toxic work situations, that we've co-formed, is this fear that it's not gonna work out. If I'm not in a big city like Cape Town, no one knows where Yugi is. Even when I say when I say it to South Africans, I'm like, I'm from Yugi. They don't know what now. What about the international community? How are they going to find you? So it's really exciting to see what technology has done, that we can actually leave the big cities and go to our rural areas. And I think being here has made me think about the ecosystems much more. It has made me think about the fact that there's no resource center here, there's no theater here. I already know some people that can help me establish some of the things that I want here, and it's really making me think about how really I've been migrating my skills, but there's something different about being at home and being with your community. And I mean, the people that have watched you grow, it hits differently. I think Cape Town welcomed me and they supported me fully, but it wasn't home. It was the place where I studied and began working in. Yeah, here it feels different. It feels you have a community, but you also know all the people in these high offices, because they like, oh, that's my friend's mom. That's my.
So you
It's
have
like you have a
both.
community that it's
Yeah.
just it's a very weird. That's exciting though, because it feels like it's fertile ground to start something. Or because when I think about Eastern Cape South Africa, and I think about rural areas in South Africa, is that we're constantly migrating skills. I mean, we grow up in these places, we have high school here, and then we go for varsity in a bigger town, and then you also start working there, and you only come home for holidays, for Christmas and Easter. And throughout the year, you forget what life is like here. And when I came back, and realized, oh my word, we don't have anything to do with Luna. It's a Saturday. There's no theater to go to. You start thinking about those gaps, and you start thinking about change in a really community-centered way. You think, are you going to create a play? It made sense in Cape Town to have R500,000 to do a play. But when you're thinking about the poverty in this place, and you think about that 500,000, you start thinking about how you can encourage culture and encourage people's appreciation of art and understanding of art using less resources, because now you're dealing with other circumstances. That's exciting for me, because it's a room full of possibilities. But also the nature of small towns and rural towns is that things move very slowly. We just we slow, and really intentional about things.
Do you think that that slow pace means that any initiatives you start to develop will have a long life and will have deep roots?
That's a hard one. I think they might have deep roots because of it's not like, because of the connections that I already have from the big city, and then you're pulling all of those resources back to your community. But then again, I think, going back to that, to how we started this conversation again about how my career has been sustained by love. I think more than anything now, it's faith. It's understanding faith and how faith operates within our creative careers, within our endeavors. Yeah, because I mean, there have been people that start things. This idea that they move to the big city and then they come back and then it fails. But I want to look at it differently. Particularly when it comes to culture. Many people have been studying the Xhosa culture and archiving, but when it comes to our stories and music and the visual arts, the paintings and the crafts, I don't feel that has been studied enough. And I feel like that's something that we can always pull back from. And being here has also made me, life in rural areas is also just very heightened. things that happen here are bizarre and interesting, and small town situations. But you start to think about the importance of storytellers, really, even if it's storytellers within the family, knowing the narratives of your family, knowing your lineage, knowing your people, and knowing the journey that your people have taken and what that can do for a family. You start thinking about, or I start thinking about theater in different ways, not necessarily the spectacle, but really how story can serve us.
I,
It
it,
seems like a lot.
no,
It,
it's
it
just
seems like a
so,
lot. But
I just, there's so much there. I go back to the prophetic nuggets, is what you said earlier about just your deep, very clear connection with who you are, where you come from, what your calling is as a storyteller, but then also that awareness of these different worlds that you inhabit and the way you can navigate these different worlds and still know what home is, still know where the base is. I love that. I love that. All right. Well, I mean, we could talk for another 2, 3, 4 hours, but I guess I'll bring it to a close. This was such an incredible conversation, and I'm
yeah.
so grateful that you took the time to talk to me today. And I want to I hope that we'll get a chance to check back in another, maybe like give it a couple more years, because I want to see what's next and what happens and what you've developed, what you've built, in the next couple years. Is that something you think we'll be able to do?
Yes, I think so. But also, we'll also be talking about the collaboration,
Yes.
and also
Oh
tracing
yeah.
tracing where we began versus the work that we've done together, the conversation, then the second conversation. Yes.
Yeah, no, that deserves its own series. I would love that so much. There's so much more to say on that, because what you've said about a collaboration with us speaks to some things I've been thinking about and working on my own. So that's definitely going to happen. I can't wait. I'm just grateful that you even had that thought. That was just fantastic. So, all right. So until next time, I'm gonna say thank you so much, Nwabisa, and I wish you all the best with your projects coming up, including with me. And we'll see you next time. Okay.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Timmy. Really, really enjoy being here and having this conversation with you.
Keyboard is produced, written, and hosted by Tembi Duncan. Theme music by Psycho Sid. Visit us on Instagram at keyboard_IG.